Israel Ray Smith was born in 1980 and lived in Whitfield, Virginia. At the age of 28, he worked at Radio Shack and was described as a quiet, caring person who kept to himself and loved his family. He enjoyed writing songs and planned to become an electrician. Sadly, he was last seen on March 10, 2008. He got off work about 8 p.m., telling his boss he would see him tomorrow and then stopped by his brother's place to visit with him. The next day, his supervisor became concerned when Israel did not show up for his shift, and he never called, which was very unlike him. Meanwhile, his mother, Debbie Sexton, also wondered why she hadn't heard from her son, which was strange because they usually talked several times a week. She'd gone by his apartment on East Moulton Street in Whitfield on March 11th and 12th and left notes on his door for him to call her. His family became even more concerned when on March 13th he missed his brother Daniel's birthday. That evening, Debbie, Daniel, and Daniel's girlfriend went by his apartment once again. His green Ford Explorer was parked outside, but there was still no answer at the door. His neighbor then told them that they had not seen him either. The next evening, on March 14th, his mother stopped in again. This time, it occurred to her that her son's vehicle had not been moved. When she checked the vehicle's doors, they were unlocked, and she noticed that a basket of clean laundry was still inside. She checked his apartment door to find it was also unlocked, but Israel was not inside. She then called police and was told that they'd already been to his apartment earlier that day for a welfare check at the request of his boss. The officers who initially answered the call for the welfare check found his apartment door slightly ajar, which his mother hadn't noticed in the previous days. Inside the apartment, the officers found the lights on, the TV going, and a gaming controller lying across the living room floor. The unlocked doors and the controller not being put back in its place were red flags to his family. Israel had been a very particular person since he was a child and always kept everything well organized and clean. He never left his apartment or vehicle doors unlocked and always put his controller back in its spot. He had a great relationship with his 7-year-old son Isaiah, who lived with his mother, and Israel visited with him every chance he got. The only thing out of the ordinary for Israel that his mother could remember was he said he was thinking of ending his relationship with a woman he was seeing. He told his mother that another man who'd recently been released from prison had moved in with the woman at her mother's home, and he wasn't comfortable with that. Police performed interviews and polygraph tests and were able to rule this connection out. The investigator was later able to tell from records that his bank account, cell phone, social security number, and social media accounts have had no activity since the day he disappeared. An analysis of his desktop computer by the state's Department of Forensic Science also yielded no useful results. A private investigator hired by his grandparents also found nothing useful in the investigation during his brief time working the case. Israel basically vanished without a trace, and as of today, his family remains devastated and the case unsolved. Tracy Ann Byrd was born July 7, 1968, and lived in Bensalem Township, Pennsylvania. She was a freshman at Bensalem High School when she was suspended from school and wasn't allowed to attend classes again until her mother met with the principal, but she had kept this a secret from her family. On the morning of March 7, 1983, Tracy's mother's live-in boyfriend, Paul Greenwald, dropped her off at school not knowing about the suspension. After she was dropped off, 14-year-old Tracy tried to get her friends to skip school with her, but they wouldn't do it. This is when Tracy disappeared and has never been heard from again. She was initially considered to be a runaway because she had once run away before after an argument with her mother, but returned the next day. Prior to her disappearance, Tracy told a friend she might be pregnant. However, no one knows if she was actually pregnant or not, or who the father of the baby could be, although Tracy's friend stated she had dated 2 boys. Strangely, Tracy's mother, Jean Louise Byrd, disappeared 7 months after Tracy did. Then on October 18, 1983, Jean's partially clothed, decomposed body was found in Blackbird State Forest in Newcastle County, Delaware. There was tape wrapped around her mouth and face, and her cause of death was asphyxiation. Paul Greenwald, who Jean had broken up with prior to her disappearance, was arrested in 1984 and charged in Jean's death. He admitted to the killing and pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Officials questioned him, hoping to get information about Tracy's disappearance, but Greenwald admitted to nothing. He committed suicide in his cell in 1986 by overdosing on medication just a day before he was to be sentenced for killing Tracy's mother, Jean. Greenwald was long considered a suspect in Tracy's disappearance, but investigators no longer believe he was involved. Police now suspect a Bucks County, Pennsylvania man as her killer, but have not publicly named the suspect, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Robert Scott Barron was last seen in Old Forge, Pennsylvania at 10 p.m. on January 25, 2017. Robert would leave the pizza restaurant he owned called Gigerelli's with his son Bobby, who he would drop off at his apartment in town. After dropping him off, he was never seen again. When he didn't arrive home that night, his wife Maria assumed he'd spent the night at the apartment above the restaurant. He was known to stay there overnight on occasions, so he could accept the delivery of the pizza dough that would arrive every morning at 7 a.m. He had made plans to pick Bobby back up the next morning, but he never showed up and didn't respond to any calls or text messages. Bobby then walked to the restaurant and found the pizza dough delivery sitting outside the back door untouched. Maria checked the apartment and saw that the comforter from the bed was missing, and she found a bloody Afghan in the bar area of the restaurant that didn't belong there. Bobby also reported that his father's cell phone was left in the kitchen. It appeared as though Robert had arrived back at the restaurant after dropping his son off. Sadly, the restaurant did not have a surveillance system, and police would have to piece together what actually occurred that night. The police discovered there had been a significant amount of blood in the restaurant. They used luminol, which revealed that a possible assault had taken place, and the perpetrators attempted to clean it up with some household cleaners that were left at the scene. In addition to the blood, police found a tooth in the utility sink, confirmed through DNA testing to be Robert's. The 2006 Hyundai Elantra that Robert owned was also missing. It was found a few days later, less than a mile from the restaurant on Howard Street. It had excessive mud on the tires and bloodstains on the interior, which were later determined to be Robert's blood. Robert's daughter saw surveillance footage from a camera down the street from the restaurant showing two men whom they think were involved in their father's disappearance. One man was wearing a light-colored t-shirt and shorts. The second man was wearing bulky clothing and wheeling a suitcase down the street that night. Robert's daughters stated the suitcase belonged to them and it was in the apartment upstairs from the restaurant that night, but it vanished and was never seen again. An employee of the restaurant told investigators that a day or two before the incident, Robert received multiple calls on the business landline, after which he told the employee not to answer the phone anymore. During the search of Robert's vehicle, police also found paperwork associated with a civil lawsuit in which he received a $14,500 default judgment the month he went missing. It is unknown if the lawsuit is related to his disappearance and probable murder. Although the restaurant was a cash business, his family doesn't think he could have been carrying more than a few $100s on the night of his disappearance. His loved ones believe he was killed at the restaurant in a botched robbery and that several people were involved, but the police haven't named any suspects. Robert is considered missing under suspicious circumstances, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Cathy Marie Moulton was born June 28, 1955, to Claire and Lehman and lived in Portland, Maine. As a teenager, she was described as kind-hearted and loving and attended Deering High School. She enjoyed looking after her elderly neighbors and often made her own clothes and wrote poetry. On Friday, September 24, 1971, at the age of 16, she came home from school and asked her parents if she could go buy new pantyhose to go along with the pantsuit that she made for a dance that evening at the YWCA downtown. They agreed, and her mother gave her money and asked her to pick up toothpaste as well. Her father dropped her off in town on Cumberland Avenue after 1 p.m. She then stopped by the Starbird Music Store on Forest Avenue to visit her friend Carol Starbird. She told her friend that she already used her bus money and was planning on walking home, and that she would see her later that night at the dance. Cathy was last seen walking down Forest Avenue toward her home, which was only about a mile away in the Woodsford Corner neighborhood. When she didn't arrive home by dinner, which was usually around 6:30, her parents reported her missing because it was very unlike her not to call if she was going to be late. Multiple witnesses claimed to have seen her that evening in a car with 2 older males. In 1971, it was very common for teenagers to run away from home, so the police assumed she was another runaway, and the Portland police did not investigate. A woman who worked at a gas station in Presque Isle claimed she saw Cathy that night with 2 boys. She told Cathy's mom that one of the boys escorted Cathy to the gas station bathroom and stood guard outside the door, then walked her back to the car. Lester Everett was a rebellious man in his early 20s and was friends with Cathy. He reportedly picked her up in a blue 4-door 1963 Cadillac that he had stolen. He then picked up a hitchhiker named Ronald Reed Purley. Purley was a Canadian national in his 20s, and Everett offered to drive him to the Tobic Reserve, just over the Canadian border nearly 5 hours away. It is unknown if Cathy agreed to go or was forced to. A neighbor of Cathy's stated she saw the 3 individuals in a mall in Bangor over 100 miles away from Portland the day after she disappeared, and she didn't appear to be in any distress. However, her neighbor at the time didn't know Cathy was reported missing, but did think it was strange to see her in Bangor. The next sighting of Cathy, Everett, and Purley was by a garage employee at Fort Fairfield in Aroostook County. They came to the garage to buy new tires for the Cadillac using a credit card that they took from the car. The employee said Purley appeared to be controlling Cathy's movements, even walking her to and from the bathroom with his hand on the back of her neck. She was then sighted across the border on the Tobic Reserve. Witnesses said they saw Everett and Cathy for a few days in September 1971 before the pair went to a farm in the Mars Hill area of Aroostook County. Another young girl who had been there for the potato harvest said Cathy was using the first name Candy and that she often cried and seemed fearful of the other men working on the farm, and said she wanted to go home. Cathy slept in the car during the period of time the men were working on the farm, and little did she know her parents were only 10 to 15 miles away at the time searching for her. One night, Everett and the girl assumed to be Cathy left the farm, and Everett returned the next morning and said he'd dropped her off at another camp. He allegedly brought her back across the Canadian border to the Maliseet First Nation reservation using a back road, avoiding Canada Customs inspection. He went to the home of Purley and his family and left her there. He returned to the potato farm, stating that he had to get her off his hands because she was nagging him about wanting to go home. It is reported that Everett was later concerned that Cathy never returned home to Portland after he left her at the reservation. He and a friend would go back to Purley's to investigate what happened to her. When they arrived, the Purley's family allegedly attacked Everett and threatened to kill him if he ever came back. At the end of the potato harvest, Everett and a few other men left for Florida to pick oranges. Everett was using a different name at the time and remained in Florida and married a woman named Darlene. She says he never mentioned Cathy when she was later interviewed in Georgia, and said the Cadillac remained in the yard on blocks for about 10 years. She said Everett died of cancer in the mid-1980s at the age of 35. It's theorized that Cathy might have lived with Purley for months. 2 women also claimed to have seen him dragging Cathy down the street by her hair. He later denied even knowing Cathy when interviewed by police in 1997 and refused to cooperate with them. He then served time for the rape and home invasion of his neighbor. He was even offered immunity from prosecution if he would provide details as to what happened to Cathy, but continued to deny any knowledge. Investigators never had enough evidence to file charges against anyone or even get warrants to search Purley's family home. In 1983, a hunter said he came across a skeleton in the woods near Smyrna, Maine, surrounded by female clothing. Some investigators believe the remains were Cathy's, but the hunter was unable to retrace his footsteps and lead police back to the site, and the bones were never seen again. Cadaver dogs were also unsuccessful in finding any remains. It's been 50 years since Cathy went missing, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Mary Shelley Rachel Carson was born in 1986 and was adopted by Charlotte and Bill Carson that same year. The Carson family lived in the Kings Grant neighborhood of Virginia Beach, Virginia. Shelley grew up with a lot of friends and loved to swim with her dad at a local recreation center, took swimming and dance lessons, and loved running. She was very athletic and played field hockey, basketball, and soccer in middle school. However, Shelley became very rebellious at the age of 14 and started running away and staying out late. Her parents had her see a therapist, but she was very uncooperative with them. On August 14, 2005, at 3:50 a.m., at the age of 18, she was seen on surveillance footage at a local gas station buying cigarettes and visiting a friend that worked there. She then got on her bike and was seen riding around at the traffic circle by Kings Grant Road and Newcastle Road close to her home. Minutes later, a witness walking his dog said he saw her further down the road. 2 hours later, a man driving by noticed a young woman's bloodied body lying under a tree near where Shelley was last seen. When police arrived, they found a woman partially nude, beaten, and clinging to life with a pink and black bicycle lying on the ground nearby. The man who found her attempted to render aid, but it was too late, and she would be pronounced dead at the scene. Meanwhile, Bill and Charlotte Carson noticed that Shelley wasn't home and thought maybe she was with her boyfriend. They left for church, and on their way there, they noticed some barriers set up just a half a mile from their home at the traffic circle. They continued on to church, where someone mentioned a body had been found. Bill began wondering if it could be Shelley and headed back to the scene where he spoke to a detective. The body was ultimately identified as Shelley because of the shoes she was wearing. The police did not let him view Shelley's body because it would have been too emotional. The autopsy revealed no evidence of drugs or alcohol in her system. There was evidence of an attempted sexual assault, and her pants were missing from the scene. The coroner was able to determine her cause of death to be from blunt force trauma to the head. Coincidentally, Shelley and her boyfriend had a lengthy argument hours before her death. He was interviewed 6 times by police, along with more than 100 other witnesses, potential informants, suspects, friends, and anyone else who came forward. But there was no evidence to link one particular person to the crime, and the case would go cold. Her killer has never been found, and as of today, this case remains unsolved.